Chapter 1. The Ring of Fire. The Pacific Ocean was deceptively calm, its vast blue surface stretching out like a sheet of polished glass under the harsh midday sun. But 7 miles beneath that serene facade, the earth was screaming. Deep within the Mariana Trench, nested inside a reinforced titanium dome that clung to the jagged edges of a subterranean chasm, Project Vulcan was underway. It was hailed as the future of clean energy, a multi-billion-dollar geothermal tapping station designed to draw power directly from the planet's mantle. Inside the central control sphere of the station, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Dr. Raymond Vance, the project's chief engineer, stared anxiously at the primary thermal grid. His face was bathed in the crimson glow of flashing warning lights. For the past 3 hours, the pressure inside Magma Chamber Prime had been climbing exponentially. The automated dampening fields, designed to keep the volatile tectonic forces in check, were failing one by one. "We need to vent the secondary conduits now, Raymond," shouted Dr. Elena Rostova, her voice straining over the deep, structural groan that vibrated through the floorboards. She was frantically typing commands into a terminal, but the screen was a cascade of amber error codes. "The crust beneath the southern pillar is liquefying. If those struts go, the entire dome collapses." Vance wiped cold sweat from his forehead. "If we vent the conduits into the trench, the thermal shock will trigger a localized steam explosion. It'll rip the pressure seals right off the habitat deck. There are 42 crew members down there, Elena." Before Elena could reply, a violent shudder rocked the facility. The lights flickered and died, replaced instantly by the eerie, pulsing strobe of emergency backup power. A deafening screech of tearing metal echoed through the intercom system. On the main schematic display, the southern pillar turned a solid, ominous red. It hadn't just weakened, it had fractured. Structural failure on sub-level 4. A technician screamed from across the room. "Magma ingress in the secondary corridors. The automated blast doors are jammed. Evacuate," Vance ordered, his voice cracking with sudden panic. He slapped his palm onto the master alarm switch. "All personnel to the escape pods. Abandon station." But even as he gave the command, he knew it was already too late. The main escape trunk line was located in the lower quadrant of the dome, directly adjacent to the collapsing southern pillar. A massive surge of molten rock had breached the outer hull, instantly melting the launch rails of the emergency pods. The crew was trapped in a hyper-pressurized titanium tomb 7 miles beneath the ocean, with a literal river of liquid fire rising beneath their feet. Vance stumbled toward the primary communications console, overriding the corrupted local network to patch into the emergency satellite array. "Mayday! Mayday!" he hollered into the transponder. "This is Project Vulcan calling any vessel or station. We have a catastrophic structural breach. Magma ingress is imminent. Our escape pods are destroyed. 42 souls on board. We cannot survive more than 2 hours. Someone, please, respond." 22,000 miles above the surface of the Earth, drifting silently in a geosynchronous orbit, Thunderbird 5 hung like a silver sentinel against the black canvas of space. Inside the satellite's advanced communications hub, John Tracy sat surrounded by a complex web of holographic displays, monitoring the endless stream of global radio traffic. Suddenly, a high-frequency spike pierced the ambient static of the Pacific monitoring grid. John's fingers flew across his console, isolating the frequency and filtering out the atmospheric interference. Dr. Vance's desperate voice filled the quiet command deck. John's expression hardened. He tapped a direct comms link to a hidden tropical paradise halfway across the world. "Thunderbird 5 to Tracy Island. Father, we have a major situation in the South Pacific." Deep within the lounge of a luxurious villa on Tracy Island, Jeff Tracy stood up from his desk. The unassuming family patriarch instantly transformed into the commander of the world's most elite rescue organization. "Go ahead, John. What have you got?" "An experimental underwater geothermal station called Project Vulcan has suffered a critical failure in the Mariana Trench," John explained, transferring the telemetry data directly to the giant map display on the lounge wall. Magma has breached the lower levels, destroying their escape routes. The structure is under intense thermal and hydrostatic pressure. The dome is collapsing, and 42 people are trapped inside. They have less than 2 hours before the structural integrity hits zero. Jeff's eyes swept over the data, assessing the scale of the disaster. It was exactly the kind of impossible scenario international rescue had been built to handle. He turned toward the adjacent lounge chairs, where his sons were already standing at attention, their expressions grim. "All right, boys, you heard the man," Jeff barked, his voice filled with authority. "This is a code red. Scott, I want you in Thunderbird 1 immediately. Get to the coordinates, establish a mobile control base, and assess the atmospheric and surface conditions. Virgil, you'll take Thunderbird 2. Equip the rescue pod with the Thunderbird 4 launch cradle, and pack the heavy-duty hydraulic boring gear. Gordon, you're with Virgil. You'll be driving Thunderbird 4 into the deep zone. The pressure down there is immense, so watch your depth gauges." "You got it, Father," Scott said, already moving toward the painting of a rocket ship on the wall. He stood before it, touched a concealed switch, and the wall flipped backward, carrying him into the hidden automated boarding gantry for Thunderbird 1. Virgil shifted behind the rotating desk, descending smoothly into the subterranean hangar where the massive green silhouette of Thunderbird 2 awaited. Gordon followed close behind, eager to get to his beloved yellow submarine. Jeff looked back up at the monitor. "Brains, are you reading this?" From his laboratory below the lounge, the brilliant, stuttering engineer Brains appeared on a secondary screen, adjusting his thick glasses. "Why yes, Mr. Tracy. Project Vulcan uses a super alloy known as Titanite 7 for its hull. It can withstand intense pressure, but if the internal temperature exceeds 1200 degrees Celsius due to the magma, the metal will become brittle and shatter like glass under the weight of the ocean. Gordon will have to be incredibly careful when he attempts a hull breach rescue." "Understood, Brains," Jeff said. He turned his eyes toward the launch bays. "Thunderbirds are go." In the launch silo of Thunderbird 1, Scott was secured into his pilot's seat. The massive sleek, silver and blue reconnaissance jet swung into a vertical position. Beneath the island, the retractable swimming pool rolled back, exposing the launch pad to the clear blue sky. "Thunderbird 1 checking in," Scott reported, his hand gripping the thruster throttle. "All systems nominal. Launching in 3, 2, 1. With a deafening roar that shook the volcanic foundations of the island, the rocket engines ignited, sending a torrent of flame into the exhaust deflectors. Thunderbird 1 shot upward out of the opening, screaming into the sky at Mach 2 and rapidly accelerating as it climbed into the stratosphere, charting a direct course for the Mariana Trench. Minutes later, the massive hangar doors at the cliffside of the island swung open. Thunderbird 2, the behemoth of the fleet, taxied forward on its heavy landing gear. Virgil pulled back on the steering yoke as the vertical lift thrusters engaged, lifting the gargantuan green transport vessel into the air. "Thunderbird 2 is airborne," Virgil radioed back to base, his face set in a look of grim determination. "ETA to the danger zone is 45 minutes. Hang on down there, Project Vulcan. International rescue is on the way." Chapter 2. Into the Vortex. The sky above the Mariana Trench was no longer blue. It had transformed into a bruised, violent expanse of purple and ash-gray clouds. The frantic geothermal venting from Project Vulcan had superheated the surrounding ocean waters, sending millions of tons of high-pressure steam boiling up into the lower atmosphere. This artificial thermal plume had collided with a cold weather front, generating a sudden, hyper-localized Category 4 cyclonic storm. Screaming through the upper stratosphere at Mach 5, Thunderbird 1 began its steep descent into the tempest. Inside the cockpit, Scott Tracy gripped the controls with both hands. The sleek silver reconnaissance jet shuddered violently as it slammed into the outer wall of the storm. Rain lashed against the armored canopy like a barrage of machine gun fire, and jagged forks of violent blue lightning illuminated the churning gloom outside. "Thunderbird 1 to Tracy Island," Scott shouted into his headset, his voice vibrating with the intense turbulence. "Father, The atmospheric conditions above the danger zone are a complete mess. The steam vents from the trench are creating massive thermal updrafts. The sea surface is a washing machine of 60-foot swells. I'm going to have a hard time finding a stable patch of airspace to hover. Back on Tracy Island, Jeff Tracy watched the telemetry data stream onto his main screen. Understood, Scott. Do you have a visual on the emergency rescue coordinates? Negative, Father. Radar is heavily degraded by electromagnetic interference caused by the subterranean friction, Scott replied, his eyes scanning a flickering tactical display. But I'm picking up the automated distress beacon from Project Vulcan. I am initiating automated hover sequence now. Scott pulled back on the primary throttle, activating the variable thrust VTOL engines. The wings of Thunderbird 1 swept forward, and the massive vertical lift nozzles beneath the fuselage roared to life, fighting against the fierce downdrafts. With expert precision, Scott stabilized the aircraft exactly 1,500 feet above the raging ocean vortex. He hit a sequence of switches on his left console, deploying the automated mobile control unit. A compact, highly advanced command desk slid out from the bulkhead, locking into place around his pilot's seat. Mobile control is established, Scott announced, his fingers instantly flying across the primary comms array. Project Vulcan, this is International Rescue. Do you read me? I repeat, this is International Rescue. A burst of static erupted from the speakers, followed by the panicked, breathless voice of Dr. Vance. International Rescue. Thank God. We are losing time down here. The magma ingress has completely consumed sub-level 4. The internal temperature in the central sphere is rising by 3 degrees every minute. The hull is groaning under the pressure. Hang tight, Dr. Vance, Scott said, his voice calm, steady, and projecting absolute confidence despite the chaos around him. We have our heavy rescue transport arriving in less than 2 minutes. We are going to deploy a deep-sea submersible to extract your crew. Can you confirm the status of your primary docking hatch? The primary hatch is jammed shut due to the structural warping of the upper deck. Vance yelled back, the sound of exploding pipes audible in the background. You can't dock with us. You'll have to cut through the hull, but if you cut in the wrong place, the entire ocean will come flooding in. Before Scott could process this grim update, the shadow of a giant fell over the storm clouds. Thunderbird 2 emerged from the dense ash cloud like a prehistoric green monster. The massive transport ship was taking a brutal pounding from the gale force winds. Inside the spacious cockpit, Virgil Tracy was working the dual steering yokes, his muscles straining against the hydraulic feedback of the controls. Thunderbird 2 to mobile control. I see you down there, Scott, Virgil radioed, his voice remarkably calm given that his multi-ton aircraft was currently bouncing around like a cork in a whirlpool. The wind shear is brutal. It's trying to rip the pod doors right off my underside. Virgil, you need to drop pod 4 immediately, Scott commanded, his eyes locked on his telemetry screens. The situation downstairs is worse than we thought. The docking hatch is offline. Gordon is going to have to perform a surgical hull breach under extreme hydrostatic pressure. And we're running out of time. The station's structural threshold is at less than 40%. In the lower deck of Thunderbird 2, inside the brightly lit interior of Pod 4, Gordon Tracy was already strapped into the pilot's seat of Thunderbird 4. The sleek, bright yellow submarine sat securely within its mechanical launching cradle, its powerful searchlights slicing through the dim pod bay. Gordon checked his oxygen mix, primed the dual atomic fusion engines, and gripped the steering joysticks. I'm ready when you are, Virg, Gordon said through the internal comms link, a fierce grin hiding the underlying anxiety he felt. Just give me a smooth drop into the drink. I don't fancy bouncing off the waves today. Smooth is going to be relative today, little brother, Virgil replied. He hovered Thunderbird 2 just 50 feet above the cresting, foam-topped waves. The ocean below was a swirling maelstrom, pulling everything toward the center of the geothermal updraft. Opening pod doors now, Virgil muttered. He flipped the protective cover off the master release switch and slammed it down. The heavy, Armored bottom doors of Pod 4 split apart, exposing the raging sea directly beneath Thunderbird 4. The hydraulic launch cradle tilted downward at a sharp 45-degree angle. Deploying Thunderbird 4. Virgil yelled. The mechanical clamps snapped back. Thunderbird 4 slid off the rails, plummeting through the open air and slamming into the furious ocean with a colossal splash. The yellow submarine disappeared instantly beneath the churning white foam, swallowed by the massive waves. Inside the cockpit of Thunderbird 4, Gordon was hit by a massive jolt as the submarine plunged into the water. The sea was an absolute chaos of currents, bubbles, and debris. The powerful turbulence spun the small submarine around like a top. The nose pitched violently downward, and the warning alarms began to chime. "Whoa. Talk about a rough ride," Gordon shouted, struggling to stabilize the craft. He punched the forward thrusters to maximum, using the vector thrust engines to counter the spinning motion. The powerful twin screws at the stern of Thunderbird 4 roared, biting into the water and driving the vessel forward, forcing it out of the surface turbulence and into the deep. Thunderbird 4 to mobile control, Gordon reported, breathing a sigh of relief as the submarine leveled out at a depth of 200 feet. "I've stabilized the dive. The surface storm is crazy, but I'm clear of the wave action. Commencing deep dive sequence toward Project Vulcan now." "Roger that, Gordon," Scott replied from Thunderbird 1. "Keep a close eye on your external hull temperature. Brains says the water near the trench is boiling. If your cooling systems fail, you'll cook inside that cockpit." "Copy that, Scott." "Down I go," Gordon said. He pushed the diving planes forward, and Thunderbird 4 angled its nose into the dark, bottomless abyss of the Mariana Trench, descending into a world of absolute darkness where only the bravest would dare to venture. Chapter 3. The Abyssal Fire. The descent into the Mariana Trench was like diving into the throat of an active volcano. At 3,000 feet, the last rays of sunlight vanished, leaving Gordon Tracy in a world of absolute, velvety blackness. At 10,000 feet, the external temperature gauge on Thunderbird 4's primary console began to tick upward. At 20,000 feet, the water outside was no longer clear. It was a murky, turbulent soup of ash, sulfur bubbles, and jagged chunks of volcanic rock thrown upward by the groaning seabed below. "Thunderbird 4 to mobile control," Gordon said, his voice tense as he maneuvered the yellow submarine between two towering underwater cliffs. "Visibility is down to less than 5 feet. I'm flying almost entirely on active sonar. The thermal plumes down here are incredible. It's like trying to fly a helicopter through a fireworks factory." Up in the stormy skies, Scott Tracy monitored Gordon's descent from the mobile control deck of Thunderbird 1. "Keep your distance from the trench walls, Gordon. The seismic telemetry shows the rock faces are highly unstable. A minor tremor could trigger a massive underwater landslide." "Tell me about it," Gordon muttered. Suddenly, a violent shudder ripped through the submarine. The active sonar screen flared a bright, blinding white. A massive explosion of superheated steam and molten rock erupted from a hidden fissure just 50 yards ahead of Thunderbird 4's bow. The shockwave slammed into the small craft, throwing Gordon forward against his harness. The submarine pitched violently to the left, heading directly toward a jagged wall of solid stone. "Gordon, report." Scott's voice crackled urgently through the static-heavy audio link. Gordon didn't answer immediately. His hands were a blur of motion across the control sticks. He fired the starboard attitude thrusters at maximum burst, fighting the immense kinetic force of the underwater explosion. The hull of Thunderbird 4 scraped against the rocky cliffside with a horrifying, metallic shriek, sending a shower of sparks into the dark water. But the powerful engines held. The submarine sheared away from the rock face at the very last second, leveling out in the center of the canyon. Gordon let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I'm okay, Scott. That was a close one. The hull took a scrape, but structural integrity is holding at 95%. The problem is the ambient water temperature. It just hit 90 degrees Celsius. The cooling pumps are working overtime. You're approaching the target zone now, Gordon," John Tracy intervened from Thunderbird 5, his holographic display projecting a precise three-dimensional model of the trench floor. Project Vulcan is directly below you, at 36,000 feet. But I'm picking up a massive thermal anomaly. A massive river of lava is flowing out of the trench floor and pooling around the station's southern foundation. The heat is rapidly weakening the Titanite 7 hull. As Thunderbird 4 cleared a final ridge of jagged volcanic rock, Gordon saw it. Through the thick, multi-layered quartz viewport of his cockpit, the terrifying reality of the disaster came into view. Project Vulcan looked like a doomed futuristic city. The massive titanium dome was glowing a faint, sinister orange around its base where the molten lava pooled against it. Columns of boiling steam roared upward from the structure, screaming into the cold ocean water like a dozen jet engines. Inside the dome, Gordon could see the flickering, erratic lights of the habitat decks. "I have visual contact with Project Vulcan," Gordon reported, his expression turning grim. "It's a complete nightmare down here, Scott. The lava has completely engulfed the lower airlocks. The upper emergency docking ring is warped out of shape, just like Dr. Vance said. There's no way to establish a standard hard seal. Brains, we need a solution now," Scott radioed back to Tracy Island. How can Gordon get 42 people out of a pressurized dome without causing an explosive decompression? On Tracy Island, Brains was pacing back and forth in front of his main supercomputer terminal. The only option, Scott, is to use Thunderbird 4's high-energy laser cutter to create a customized entry port on the upper observation deck. That area of the dome is currently above the internal magma level. However, the moment Gordon cuts through the hull, the sudden change in pressure will cause a catastrophic failure if the environment isn't equalized. How do we equalize it? Virgil chimed in from Thunderbird 2, which was still hovering precariously in the storm clouds above the ocean surface. Thunderbird 4 must deploy its magnetic pressure tent, Brains explained, his fingers tapping rapidly on a keyboard to send the schematics to Gordon's console. It is a heavy-duty, flexible synthetic fabric reinforced with electromagnetic locking rings. Gordon must attach the tent over the target area, inflate it to match the station's internal air pressure, and then cut through the hull from inside the tent. It will create a safe, pressurized airbridge between the station and Thunderbird 4. Got it, Gordon said, reading the data on his screen. But that fabric is only rated for up to 400 degrees. If a fresh wave of magma hits that observation deck while the tent is deployed, it'll melt like plastic. Then you'll have to be incredibly fast, Gordon, Jeff Trass's voice boomed over the channel from the island base. The lives of 42 people are counting on you. Proceed with the rescue operation. Roger that, Father. Moving into position, Gordon said. He guided Thunderbird 4 downward, descending through the turbulent, boiling currents toward the very top of the doomed geothermal station. The shadow of the yellow submarine fell across the glowing, stressed metal of the observation deck. Inside the station, the trapped crew members looked up through the thick viewing windows, their terrified faces illuminated by the bright searchlights of international rescue. They knew this was their very last chance for survival. Chapter 4. The Pressure Tent. The water surrounding the upper observation deck of Project Vulcan was screaming. The immense heat from the lava flow below was causing the deep-sea water to boil against the metal structure, creating a chaotic vortex of superheated currents. Inside Thunderbird 4, Gordon Tracy fought the controls with every ounce of his strength. The yellow submarine bounced and pitched violently, its automated stabilization thrusters firing in short, frantic bursts. Thunderbird 4 to mobile control, Gordon shouted over the roaring whine of his engines. The thermal updrafts are brutal. It's like trying to park a car on top of a tornado. I can barely keep her steady enough to line up the deployment arms. From the cockpit of Thunderbird 1, Scott tracked the submarine's precise movements on his telemetry grid. Take your time, Gordon, but move fast. The station's structural threshold just dropped to 28%. Dr. Vance reports that the lower bulkhead on sub-level 3 is bowing inward under the hydrostatic weight. If that wall gives, the ocean will crush them before the magma does. Understood, Gordon grunted. He flipped open the safety cover of the primary utility controls. Deploying magnetic anchoring clamps now. Two heavy, hydraulic arms extended from the nose of Thunderbird 4. At the end of each arm was a high-powered electromagnetic pad. Gordon guided the submarine downward, bringing it inches away from the sloped, reinforced titanium roof of the observation deck. "Steady, steady," Gordon whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. A sudden undercurrent slammed into the submarine's flank, tilting it dangerously. Gordon reacted instantly, firing the opposite side thrusters while pushing the mechanical arms forward. Clang! A heavy, dull metallic thud resonated through Thunderbird 4's hull. The green indicator lights on the console flashed to life. "We have a lock," Gordon reported. "Starboard and port clamps are secure. Thunderbird 4 is anchored to the station hull." Deploying the pressure tent. With the submarine firmly attached to the roof, Gordon activated the secondary deployment sequence. A massive, heavy-duty hatch on the belly of Thunderbird 4 slid open. From the compartment, a thick, tightly folded mass of black, multi-layered synthetic fabric began to unravel. This was the high-pressure deployment tent, reinforced with high-tensile carbon fiber ribs and a massive ring of ultra-powerful electromagnets at its base. Using a set of precise joysticks, Gordon manipulated the external robotic cranes to spread the fabric across the flat surface of the station's hull. The electromagnetic ring snapped down against the titanium roof with a powerful force, creating a watertight, airtight seal over a 10-foot section of the observation deck. "The tent is sealed against the hull," Gordon radioed. Initiating internal pressurization sequence. He pumped high-pressure nitrogen gas into the tent, inflating it like a heavy-duty dome. The external sensors monitored the pressure differential. The water was pushed out of the tent's interior, replaced by a dense, highly compressed atmosphere that exactly matched the extreme hydrostatic pressure of the surrounding ocean, and the internal pressure of the station below. Pressurization complete. "The pressure is equalized," Gordon announced, wiping a layer of sweat from his eyes. "Now comes the tricky part. I'm moving into the airbridge." Gordon unbuckled his flight harness and stood up from the pilot's seat. He grabbed a heavy, yellow handheld laser torch from the emergency locker and moved to the floor hatch of Thunderbird 4. Opening the primary hatch, he descended a short ladder into the newly created airbridge inside the inflated tent. The environment inside the tent was stiflingly hot, the air smelling strongly of ozone and synthetic rubber. The titanium floor beneath his boots was vibrating like a living thing, radiating an intense, burning heat from the magma below. Gordon knelt down on the metal floor, holding the heavy laser torch with both hands. He pulled the trigger, and a blinding, high-frequency blue laser beam sliced out, striking the station's thick hull. White-hot sparks erupted in the cramped space, bouncing off his protective visor. Gordon to mobile control. "I've started cutting the extraction hatch," Gordon radioed through his suit's built-in comms line. "This Titanite 7 alloy is tough stuff. It's like cutting through frozen iron with a butter knife." "Hurry, Gordon," John's voice crackled from Thunderbird 5. "I'm detecting a major seismic tremor originating along the trench fault line. A massive shockwave is traveling toward your position. It's going to hit the station in less than 3 minutes." "Terrific," Gordon muttered, increasing the laser's power output to the absolute maximum. The blue beam flared brighter, the metal beginning to liquefy and run like water. "Scott, tell Virgil he needs to prepare Thunderbird 2 for an immediate medical evacuation. The crew is going to be in bad shape when we pull them out." "Virgil's already on it, Gordon," Scott replied. "Just get that hatch open." With a final, desperate burst of energy, Gordon swept the laser torch around the perimeter of a 4-foot square. The thick slab of titanium fractured. With a loud thud, the cut section of the hull fell inward, dropping into the dark, smoke-filled interior of Project Vulcan's observation deck. A thick plume of black, acrid smoke billowed up through the hole, coughing into the pressure tent. Gordon peered down through the opening, his searchlight cutting through the haze. Looking back up at him from the darkness were dozens of wide, terrified eyes. Dr. Vance stood at the front of the group, his clothes torn and stained with soot. International rescue. Vance gasped, coughing violently. We're here. The lower levels are gone. All right, everyone, listen up. Gordon shouted down to them, his voice echoing authoritatively through the smoke. One at a time. Women and injured first. Climb up the ladder into Thunderbird 4. We don't have much time before the whole place goes under. Chapter 5. The Gathering Storm. The seismic shockwave hit the Mariana Trench with the force of a nuclear detonation. Deep beneath the ocean floor, the tectonic plates ground against each other, sending a massive kinetic shudder ripping through the water. Inside the pressurized tent, Gordon Tracy was thrown completely off his feet. He slammed hard against the synthetic fabric wall, his handheld laser torch skittering across the trembling titanium hull. Below him, inside the smoky observation deck of Project Vulcan, a chorus of terrified screams erupted. The entire station groaned as the structural pillars twisted under the immense kinetic load. A massive explosion of sparks flared from a secondary control panel in the room below, plunging the trapped crew into near-total darkness, saved only by the beam of Gordon's flashlight. Gordon. Report. Scott's voice exploded through the comms link, his tone laced with deep anxiety. Up on the surface, Thunderbird 1 had been buffeted by a sudden 60-foot surge in the ocean swells, caused by the displacement of the seabed miles below. I'm here, Scott, Gordon yelled, scrambling back to his knees and looking down into the hatch. The shockwave just hit us. The station's internal structure is buckling. We need to move the evacuation into overdrive. You have less than 80 seconds before a massive secondary tremor hits, John Tracy warned from Thunderbird 5. His orbital scanners were tracking a massive displacement of rock just a mile up the trench wall. And Gordon, that first shockwave just triggered a massive underwater landslide. A wall of mud and rock is cascading down the canyon directly toward Project Vulcan. Understood, Thunderbird 5, Gordon said, his face set in grim determination. He leaned over the open hatch. Dr. Vance, get your people up here now. No delays, no baggage. Just move. The evacuation became a frantic, desperate race against time. The first technician, a young woman with a severe laceration across her forehead, was pushed up through the hatch by Vance. Gordon grabbed her under the arms, hauling her into the pressurized tent and guiding her up the ladder into the main cabin of Thunderbird 4. Go, straight to the back. Gordon ordered. One by one, the crew members climbed up through the hole in the hull. The small, yellow submarine was rapidly filling up. Designed normally for a crew of 3 or 4 during standard operations, its spacious aft equipment bay had been stripped down by brains for this exact purpose, but 42 people was pushing the absolute physical limits of the vessel. They were packed shoulder to shoulder, the air growing warm and heavy as the submarine's environmental systems worked at maximum capacity to scrub the carbon dioxide. That's 35. Gordon counted aloud, pulling an older engineer through the hatch. 7 more to go. Dr. Vance, who is left? Just myself, Elena, and 4 technicians from the core team. Vance shouted from below, his voice nearly drowned out by a terrifying, deep-pitched crack that echoed from the lower decks. The floor of the observation deck was beginning to tilt at an alarming 15-degree angle as the southern foundations of the station completely liquefied in the magma. Outside, the situation was degenerating at a terrifying speed. The massive wall of displaced rock and silt from the underwater landslide was roaring down the trench like a dark, subterranean avalanche. The turbulent current generated by the debris field slammed into Thunderbird 4, causing the heavy hydraulic anchoring arms to shriek in protest. The green indicator lights on Gordon's console back in the cockpit began to flicker to an ominous amber. Gordon, the clamps are losing their grip. Virgil radioed from Thunderbird 2, his voice tight with tension as he monitored his brother's telemetry. The lateral force from that landslide is too high. If those electromagnets fail, Thunderbird 4 will be ripped away from the station, and the pressure tent will tear open. Just 30 more seconds, Virgil. Gordon pleaded, reaching down to grab Dr. Elena Rostova's hand. He hauled her up into the tent just as a violent burst of superheated steam erupted from a fractured pipe inside the observation deck, obscuring Vance and the remaining technicians in a white shroud. Raymond! Elena screamed, reaching back toward the hatch. Stay back, Elena! Vance's voice called out through the steam. He was lifting the final technician up toward Gordon. Gordon grabbed the man and pulled him through. Two left. Gordon yelled. Vance, get up here. Suddenly, the secondary tremor struck. The seabed buckled violently. A jagged fissure tore open directly beneath Project Vulcan's main dome. A fresh, massive surge of molten magma, pressurized by the shifting tectonic plates, shot upward like a geyser. The liquid fire slammed directly into the lower sub-levels of the station, instantly vaporizing the remaining structural struts. With a deafening structural roar, the entire observation deck tilted violently. The sudden movement was too much for the stressed anchoring clamps of Thunderbird 4. Snap! The port side electromagnetic pad shattered, the heavy hydraulic arm whipping backward into the water. The pressure tent groaned, the synthetic fabric stretching to its absolute limits as the submarine began to shear away from the tilting station. The tent is tearing, Gordon shouted, his boots sliding across the slick, angled metal of the hull. Vance! Jump! Jump now! Dr. Vance leapt for the hatch, his fingers catching the rim of the opening just as a massive wall of dark mud and rock from the landslide slammed into the side of the station, burying the lower half of the dome in a crushing grave of stone. Chapter 6. The Broken Seal. The synthetic fabric of the pressure tent let out a terrifying, high-pitched scream as the fibers began to snap. Through the widening micro-tears in the wall, jets of freezing, hyper-pressurized ocean water shot into the enclosure like solid steel rods, cutting through the dense smoke and slashing across the metal floor. Vance! Give me your hand! Gordon roared, his boots sliding through the pooling water on the angled hull. He leaned precariously over the edge of the opening, his fingers straining to reach the chief engineer. Dr. Vance was hanging by his fingertips from the lip of the buckling hatch. Below him, the observation deck was a roaring furnace of exploding electrical circuits and rising steam. I can't hold on, Gordon. The station is sliding into the trench. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Gordon lunged forward, throwing his entire weight onto the lip of the hatch. His gloved fingers clamped firmly around Vance's wrist just as the engineer's grip slipped. I've got you, Gordon yelled, his muscles burning as he hauled Vance upward. At that exact second, a massive chunk of volcanic rock from the ongoing landslide slammed into the roof of the station. The impact sheared off the remaining starboard anchoring clamp of Thunderbird 4. The yellow submarine was ripped away from the structure by the furious underwater currents. The pressure tent tore completely open with a deafening explosion of displaced water. Gordon! Scott's voice screamed through the comms, but it was instantly drowned out by a deafening roar of static. The sudden influx of 40,000 tons of hydrostatic pressure collapsed the remaining air pocket in a fraction of a second. Gordon felt a colossal weight slam into his back, throwing him and Dr. Vance headfirst through the open floor hatch into the cabin of Thunderbird 4. Gordon's survival instincts took over. As he hit the deck, he reached up with a bleeding hand and slammed his palm onto the emergency hatch override switch. The heavy, armored titanium hatch of Thunderbird 4 slid shut and locked into place with a pneumatic hiss, just a microsecond before the full force of the ocean could flood the vessel. Outside, Project Vulcan was completely swallowed by the darkness of the trench. The main dome fractured into 1,000 pieces under the immense weight of the water and the rising magma, collapsing into a ruined heap of molten metal and crushed stone. Inside the submarine, the scene was pure chaos. The sudden impact had tossed the 41 rescued crew members into a tangled heap in the aft cabin. Alarms were blaring from every corner of the dashboard. The primary lighting was dead, leaving the cramped space illuminated only by the pulsing, amber strobe of the emergency backup cells. Gordon scrambled into the pilot's seat, wiping blood from a shallow cut on his forehead. He gripped the main steering joysticks and checked his dashboard indicators. Thunderbird 4 to mobile control. Scott, Virgil, do you read me? Gordon shouted into his headset. Gordon. Thank goodness. Scott's voice burst through the speaker, filled with immense relief. We lost your telemetry for 10 seconds. What's your status? The station is gone, Scott. Project Vulcan is history, Gordon reported grimly, his hands flying across the control panels to stabilize the submarine. But I've got all 42 crew members on board. The bad news is we took a massive beating when the tent tore. My ballast tanks are ruptured, and the forward diving planes are jammed in a downward angle. We're sinking deeper into the trench, and the external hull temperature is hitting 98 degrees Celsius. Brains, what do we do? Scott radioed back to Tracy Island. Thunderbird 4 can't blow its tanks, and she's carrying too much weight to fight the descent with thrusters alone. On Tracy Island, Brains was typing furiously on his terminal, analyzing the structural stress data of the submarine. Scott, the extra weight of 42 people has altered the craft's center of gravity. Combined with the ruptured ballast tanks, the vertical lift thrusters will burn out in less than 3 minutes if Gordon tries to force a direct ascent. He needs to use the kinetic energy of the thermal vents. Explain, Brains. Virgil demanded from Thunderbird 2, which was still circling the raging eye of the storm above the ocean surface. Gordon must navigate toward the primary thermal plume, the massive updraft of superheated water rising from the volcanic fissure, Brains explained. If he angles the remaining tail flaps correctly, the force of the rising water will carry Thunderbird 4 upward like a hot air balloon. It will push him out of the trench, but the intense heat will severely test the hull insulation. You heard him, Gordon, Scott said. Find that plume and ride it up. Virgil is preparing Thunderbird 2 for an emergency surface interception. The moment you break the surface, he's going to scoop you out of the water before the storm destroys you. Roger that, Gordon said, turning his eyes to the murky viewport. Locating the thermal plume now. Hang on back there, folks. This is going to be a very bumpy ride. Chapter 7. The Thermal Updraft. The internal temperature of Thunderbird 4 was climbing fast. Inside the packed cabin, the air felt like a humid furnace. The 42 survivors huddled close together, holding onto the structural ribs of the hull as the vessel pitched and groaned. Gordon Tracy sat in the pilot's seat, his hands steady on the controls despite the sweat stinging his eyes. On his tactical display, a massive, swirling column of crimson light indicated the primary thermal plume, a towering underwater column of superheated water blasting up from the ruptured volcanic seabed. Thunderbird 4 to mobile control, Gordon said, his voice strained. I'm entering the outer edge of the thermal plume now. The hull is vibrating like a tuning fork. If these structural welds don't hold, we're going to turn into a tin can. From the mobile control console in Thunderbird 1, Scott Tracy watched the critical telemetry indicators flash red. The water temperature inside that plume is over 150 degrees Celsius, Gordon. Your external cooling pumps are running at 120% capacity. You can only stay in there for a few minutes before the electronic systems fry. Then let's hope this lift is as fast as Brains promised, Gordon muttered. He moved the primary joystick forward, steering the damaged submarine directly into the path of the roaring underwater torrent. The moment the nose of Thunderbird 4 crossed into the plume, a massive kinetic force slammed into the vessel. It felt like being hit by a freight train. The submarine was instantly yanked upward, its nose pitching violently toward the surface. Whoa! Gordon yelled, fighting to keep the craft from spinning out of control. He activated the auxiliary rear tail flaps, angling them to catch the massive upward rush of water. It's working. We're rising. Vertical ascent speed is crossing 40 knots, 50 knots. We're flying up out of the trench. Keep her steady, Gordon. Virgil Tracy radioed from Thunderbird 2. Above the surface, the storm had escalated into a terrifying vortex. 90-foot waves crashed through the darkness, and the wind shear was threatening to stall the heavy transport ship. The ocean surface is a disaster zone. I'm hovering directly over your projected exit coordinates, but I can barely hold my position. The automated guidance systems are struggling against the lightning interference. I don't have much control over where I pop up, Virgil, Gordon warned, his eyes locked on the rapidly decreasing depth gauge. 10,000 feet. 7,000. 4,000. The pressure is dropping fast, but the hull temperature isn't coming down. The insulation is failing. Inside the main cabin, a sudden pop echoed from the rear bulkhead. A cloud of acrid white smoke hissed out from an electrical junction box. The survivors gasped, panic spreading through the crowd as the cabin lights flickered and died completely, leaving them in absolute darkness. "Everyone stay calm," Dr. Vance shouted, using his hand torch to illuminate the ceiling. "International Rescue knows what they are doing. Keep your grips." 2,000 feet. Gordon shouted into his headset, ignoring the warning sirens screaming in his ears. "Scott, my navigation grid just went completely offline. I'm flying blind. I need a vector to Thunderbird 2's recovery position." "I've got you on my radar, Gordon," Scott replied instantly from Thunderbird 1, his fingers flying across his mobile control tracking screen. "You're drifting 300 yards to the east of Virgil's position. You're going to break the surface in 15 seconds. Virgil, adjust your hover coordinates now. East-southeast, 300 yards. Roger that, Scott. Moving now." Virgil roared, pulling back hard on his flight yokes. The massive green engines of Thunderbird 2 screamed as they fought the gale force winds, tilting the gargantuan transport ship sharply to the side as it raced to intercept the rising submarine. 500 feet. 300. 100. Gordon counted down, bracing himself against the control panel. "Hold on back there. We're breaking surface." With a colossal explosion of white foam and displaced water, Thunderbird 4 erupted from the ocean like a breaching whale. The yellow submarine shot 10 feet into the air before crashing heavily back down into the churning, furious waves of the Category 4 storm. A massive 90-foot wave immediately crashed over the canopy, spinning the damaged craft around like a toy in a bathtub. Without its ballast tanks, Thunderbird 4 was floating precariously low in the water, completely at the mercy of the raging tempest. Thunderbird 2 to Gordon. "I see you." Virgil's voice boomed through the static. "But you're drifting fast toward a jagged reef system. I'm deploying the recovery magnetic cables now. You've got to lock onto them before the next wave rolls you over." Chapter 8. The Snare. The wind above the Pacific was a shrieking demon, tearing at the massive green hull of Thunderbird 2. Virgil Tracy felt every shudder of the aircraft through the hydraulic feedback of his dual steering yokes. The heavy transport ship was hovering a mere 30 feet above the cresting, foam-slicked waves. Directly below, Thunderbird 4 was tossing violently in the white water, looking dangerously small and fragile against the towering 90-foot swells. "Thunderbird 2 to mobile control," Virgil shouted, his forearms straining as he corrected for a sudden 60-knot downdraft. "I can't maintain a stable hover for long, Scott. The wind shear is trying to push my port wing right into the ocean. I'm preparing to deploy the magnetic recovery lines now." From the cockpit of Thunderbird 1, Scott Tracy watched the unfolding drama through his high-resolution optical tracking sensors. "You've only got one shot at this, Virgil. The surface currents have caught Thunderbird 4. It's drifting at 12 knots directly toward the jagged teeth of the Black Ridge Reef. If Gordon hits those rocks, the hull will rip open like paper." Inside the pitching cockpit of Thunderbird 4, Gordon Tracy was gripped by a sense of impending disaster. Every time the small submarine rose to the crest of a wave, he could see the dark, razor-sharp outlines of the coral reef through the rain-lashed viewport. It was less than 200 yards away. "Come on, Virgil," Gordon muttered, his fingers tightly clamped around his dead control sticks. Any time now would be great. In the main cabin behind him, the 42 survivors were holding their breath. Dr. Vance had gathered the remaining technicians into a tight circle, bracing them against the structural frames of the interior hull. They could hear the terrifying roar of the breakers crashing against the reef outside. High above them, Virgil flipped open the protective plastic cover of the winch deployment matrix. "Deploying magnetic recovery cables," he yelled into his headset. Two heavy-duty hatches on the underside of Thunderbird 2's nose snapped open. With a loud pneumatic hiss, Two massive, steel-reinforced cables shot downward through the driving rain. At the end of each cable was a heavy, disc-shaped electromagnetic grappling pod, glowing with a bright blue guidance light. The pods plummeted through the storm, swinging wildly in the fierce gale force winds. The first cable missed completely, striking the churning sea with a massive splash just 10 feet to the left of the submarine. Missed. Scott radioed from mobile control. The wind caught the line. Adjust your heading 5 degrees to starboard, Virgil. Thunderbird 4 is running out of room. Virgil grunted, throwing his weight against the steering yoke. Thunderbird 2 banked hard, its massive vertical lift thrusters scorching the surface of the water. The second magnetic pod swung like a pendulum through the air, slicing through the heavy rain. Clang. Asterisk. A massive, echoing metallic strike reverberated through the hull of Thunderbird 4. The second magnetic pod had struck the flat upper deck of the submarine, its ultra-powerful electromagnets instantly locking onto the Titanite-7 alloy with thousands of pounds of magnetic force. "We have a lock on line 2. Gordon shouted, watching a green indicator light flare to life on his secondary backup console. "But we're still drifting. The single line isn't enough to stop our forward momentum. I'm engaging the primary winch." Virgil responded. He slammed his hand onto the retraction lever. The heavy steel cable snapped taut with a terrifying twang that echoed over the roar of the storm. The immense weight of Thunderbird 4, combined with the 42 people inside and the thousands of gallons of water rushing over its deck, put an incredible strain on the winch system. Inside Thunderbird 2's cockpit, a loud warning buzzer began to chime. "The winch motor is overheating," Virgil yelled. "The current is pulling the sub under the water. I need to lift, but if I lift too fast, the cable will snap." "You have no choice, Virgil." Scott's voice cut through the static, urgent and sharp. "The reef is right beneath her. Lift. Lift now." Through the viewport, Gordon saw a massive, jagged pillar of black coral rise out of the trough of a wave, barely 5 feet from the submarine's nose. "Virgil. Up. Up." Virgil pulled back on the steering yokes with every ounce of strength he possessed. He punched the primary rocket boosters, dumping a massive charge of fuel into the main engines. Thunderbird 2 let out a deafening, thunderous roar that shook the storm clouds. The massive transport ship surged upward into the sky. The magnetic cable groaned, stretching under the colossal tension. For a fraction of a second, Thunderbird 4 remained trapped in the grip of the ocean, its nose dipping beneath the foaming surface. Then, with a sudden, violent surge, the yellow submarine was yanked clear of the water. It swung through the air like a massive pendulum, clearing the topmost jagged peak of the Black Ridge Reef by a mere matter of inches. "We're clear," Gordon gasped, looking down through his floor hatch to see the foaming, razor-sharp rocks passing harmlessly beneath them. "We're airborne, Virgil. You pulled us out." "Don't celebrate yet, Gordon," Virgil panted, his muscles shaking from the physical effort of controlling the aircraft. "The winch is locked, and you're hanging by a single line in a Category 4 storm. I can't pull you into the pod bay while we're bouncing around like this. I have to carry you out of the storm zone before we can safely land and get those people out." "Roger that, Thunderbird 2, Scott chimed in from Thunderbird 1, charting a safe trajectory out of the tempest. "I'm setting a course for a flat, stable island ridge 10 miles to the north. Follow my lead, Virgil. Let's get International Rescue's biggest passenger load home." Chapter 9. The Thin Air. Hanging 50 feet beneath Thunderbird 2 by a single steel cable, Thunderbird 4 swung violently through the gray wall of rain. Inside the submarine, the atmosphere had turned deadly. The sudden increase in temperature from the volcanic plume had damaged the automated air scrubbers in the aft compartment. Now, with 42 people packed into a space designed for a tiny crew, the oxygen levels were plummeting. "Gordon to Thunderbird 2, Gordon gasped into his headset, his chest heaving as he fought the suffocating air. "We have a major problem down here. The life support systems are failing. The carbon dioxide levels are spiking into the danger zone. My crew is starting to pass out." Up in the cockpit of Thunderbird 2, Virgil Trass's eyes widened. He glanced at his primary diagnostic display, which confirmed the failing air quality inside the dangling sub. Hang on, Gordon. We're clearing the outer edge of the storm wall right now. I'm pushing the engines to their absolute limit. Brains, can we vent the sub from the outside? Scott Tracy asked from Thunderbird 1, his silver jet leading the way through the breaking clouds toward a flat, Emerald Island ridge ahead. On Tracy Island, Brains was typing furiously on his console, his expression deeply concerned. N-negative, Scott. If Gordon opens the auxiliary pressure vents while hanging in midair at this speed, the sudden aerodynamic drag will rip Thunderbird 4 right off the magnetic cable. They must land immediately. Inside the suffocating yellow submarine, the situation was critical. Dr. Vance was slouched against the bulkhead, his breathing shallow and rapid. Several of the younger technicians had already lost consciousness, their heads rolling limply against their colleagues' shoulders. Gordon stumbled back from the pilot's seat, his legs feeling like lead. He grabbed a small emergency oxygen canister from the wall kit, cracked the valve, and held it to Elena Rostova's face. Breathe deep, Elena, Gordon whispered, his own vision blurring around the edges. What about you? She murmured weakly. International rescue. Doesn't quit, Gordon said, offering a faint, forced smile before stumbling back to his controls. He gripped the steering sticks, trying to keep the submarine's nose pointed forward into the wind to minimize the violent swinging motion. Thunderbird 1 to Virgil, I have the landing zone in sight, Scott's voice cut through the static, projecting absolute authority. A flat volcanic plateau on Akua Island. It's clear of the storm, but the runway is short and covered in loose gravel. You'll have to perform a precise vertical landing while lowering Gordon simultaneously. Roger, Scott. Initiating descent sequence now, Virgil replied, his voice tight with concentration. Thunderbird 2 crossed the threshold of the storm, suddenly emerging into bright, blinding sunlight. Below them lay the green peaks of Akua Island. Virgil pushed the nose of the giant transport ship down, decelerating rapidly as the massive vertical lift thrusters engaged with a deep, resonant rumble. Gordon, I'm lowering the winch. Virgil shouted. I'm going to set you down on the grass just before my landing gear touches the rock face. Get ready to pop that main hatch the second your hull hits the dirt. Copy that. Gordon wheezed, his fingers slipping on the emergency release lever. The air in his lungs felt like fire. He looked down through the viewport and saw the green grass of the plateau rushing up to meet them. Lowering cable now, Virgil muttered. The winch spun, dropping Thunderbird for the final 30 feet. The submarine's yellow hull scraped against the soft earth of the plateau, bouncing twice before skidding to a halt in the lush grass. Clang. Virgil instantly cut the electromagnetic lock, freeing the cable. Thunderbird 2 roared past overhead, its massive landing gear extending as it touched down on the adjacent gravel ridge with a cloud of dust and a screech of heavy tires. Inside Thunderbird 4, the sudden stop threw Gordon against the dashboard. Fighting the dizziness washing over his brain, he lunged toward the primary emergency exit handle. He threw his weight against it, pulling the lever down with the last ounce of his strength. The heavy side hatch blew outward with a loud pneumatic hiss. A rush of cool, fresh Pacific air flooded into the suffocating cabin. Gordon collapsed across the threshold of the open hatch, drawing the sweet, clean oxygen deep into his starved lungs. Behind him, 42 survivors began to cough and draw breath, their eyes blinking in the brilliant tropical sunlight. They were alive, on solid ground, and finally safe from the abyssal fire of the trench. Chapter 10. The calm after the storm. The afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow across the volcanic plateau of Akua Island. The air was fresh and clear, carrying the scent of tropical flowers and salt water, a stark contrast to the sulfur and smoke that had nearly claimed 42 lives miles below. International Rescue's massive fleet sat on the green ridge, their hulls gleaming under the blue sky. Thunderbird 2 stood like a silent sentinel, its heavy landing gear firmly planted in the earth, while Thunderbird 1 hovered slightly down the ridge, its engines humming a low, steady song. Scott Tracy stood by the open side door of Thunderbird 1's cockpit, watching the local medical evacuation helicopters arrive from the nearest mainland base. A team of paramedics was already busy moving down the line of survivors, handing out thermal blankets, water bottles, and oxygen masks. Thunderbird 1 to Tracy Island, Scott spoke into his wrist communicator, a sense of deep relief in his voice. Father, all 42 crew members from Project Vulcan are accounted for. The local medical teams have taken over. Dr. Vance and Dr. Rostova are being treated for minor smoke inhalation, but the doctors say everyone is going to make a full recovery. Back in the lounge of Tracy Island, Jeff Tracy let out a long, slow breath, a proud smile breaking across his face. Excellent work, Scott. It was a close one today. How is Gordon? Down on the grass, sitting on the edge of Thunderbird 4's open hatch, Gordon Tracy was holding a cold bottle of water against his forehead. He had a white bandage wrapped around the minor cut on his brow, but his eyes were bright, and his breathing was perfectly normal. Virgil Tracy walked over, handing him a clean towel. You look like you've been through a washing machine, little brother, Virgil said with a warm grin, clapping Gordon on the shoulder. You don't know the half of it, Virg, Gordon laughed, taking a long drink of water. Between the magma geysers, the underwater landslide, and trying to fit 42 people into a sub built for 3, I think I've had enough of the deep sea for at least a week. Next time, you're driving Thunderbird 4. Not a chance, Virgil smiled, looking back at the yellow submarine. Though Brains is going to have his hands full when we get back. Your ballast tanks are completely shredded, and the forward diving planes look like they've been chewed on by a mechanical shark. From the communication screen inside Thunderbird 2's cockpit, John Tracy's holographic image appeared, looking relaxed for the first time in hours. Don't forget about the internal wiring, Virgil. Gordon managed to fry the main air scrubbers and half the lighting grid during that thermal updraft. Brains is already muttering to himself in the lab about rewiring the entire propulsion matrix. Dr. Vance walked over to the two brothers, his steps a little shaky but his expression filled with immense gratitude. He paused before Gordon, extending a hand. Mr. Tracy, or whoever you truly are, Vance said, his voice thick with emotion. There are no words to properly thank you. When that dome began to buckle, I thought we were dead men. International Rescue did the impossible today. You saved my entire team. Gordon stood up and shook Vance's hand firmly. That's what we're here for, Doctor. Just do us a favor and build your next power station a little further away from an active fault line, okay? Vance let out a genuine laugh. I think I can promise you that. Project Vulcan is officially cancelled. We'll look for our clean energy on dry land from now on. With the last of the survivors safely loaded onto the medical transports, the helicopters lifted off, their rotors beating the air as they flew away toward the horizon. The plateau grew quiet once more, save for the ambient sounds of the island. All right, boys, let's wrap it up and come on home, Jeff Tracy's voice boomed over the global network channel. You've earned a good meal and a long rest. Thunderbird 5 will keep an eye on the Pacific seismic grid for the rest of the night. Roger that, Father, Scott replied. Thunderbird 1 preparing for departure. Scott climbed back into his command seat, sliding the cockpit canopy shut. Beneath the aircraft, the powerful vertical lift engines roared, tilting the silver jet upward. With a deafening flash of speed, Thunderbird 1 shot into the clear sky, disappearing into the upper atmosphere within seconds. Virgil walked up the gantry into the cockpit of Thunderbird 2, while Gordon secured the main hatch of Thunderbird 4. The heavy mechanical winch lifted the yellow submarine back into the belly of Pod 4, locking it securely into its cradle for the flight home. The pod doors slid shut, sealing the vessel away. Moments later, the massive green transport ship taxied forward, its vertical thrusters lifting its immense weight effortlessly off the grass. Virgil pulled back on the steering yoke, pointing the nose of Thunderbird 2 toward the hidden paradise of Tracy Island. As the two magnificent rescue craft flew side by side into the setting sun, the world below was safe once more. International rescue had answered the call, faced the absolute limits of nature's fury, and emerged victorious. Thunderbirds were home.